Welcome to Little Feet Community Podcast, where the wonders of childhood take center stage. I'm Patty O'Connor, a retired preschool director and your host. In each episode, we will chat with professionals, parents, and community members to get to the heart of what it really takes to help those early years feel magical for both you and your child. In today's episode, we'll be talking about parenting styles and offering advice for how to navigate situations when your parenting style varies greatly from those around you. To help us with this topic, we'll be chatting with Kate Kripke of the popular podcast Motherhood Uncut. Kate is a licensed clinical social worker and perinatal mental health counselor based in Colorado. In 2007, Kate founded the Postpartum Wellness Center of Boulder, now called the Parent and Family Wellness Center. Kate is the author of Reinventing Supermom: Support and Strategies for New Mothers Who Feel Lost. So, let's imagine that you meet your cousin's family out for pizza night. You love your cousin and always dreamed of sharing fun nights like this. But as the order is placed, your cousin hands out the iPads, and their kids are now focused on the screens. In your family, you have a no iPad at the table rule, but now your kids are looking at you like, hey, how come they get to do it? What do? It can sometimes be surprising when someone you have so much in common with parents their kids in a very different way than you. And knowing how to navigate this while maintaining your bonds can be a real challenge. To help us with this scenario and other scenarios like it, I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Kate Kripke. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Patty. I'm so happy to be here.
Kate, we love your podcast, Motherhood Uncut. And one of the things that really stands out about the podcast community that you've built is how much it celebrates women supporting other women and mothers supporting other mothers. So I'm very interested to hear your advice for these parents to help them navigate moments when they are not feeling particularly supportive of how their friends are parenting their kids.
Well, anyone who's been a mother, parent, but talk about mothers, knows that feeling so well of feeling judged and judging, right? We've all been in that situation. And I think, Patty, that this idea of being a good mom is at the root of so much of our fear and hope as mothers, that if we are not fully confident in the choices we're making with our kids, which, by the way, most of us aren't if we haven't done some real internal work to learn how to really trust ourselves, we are going to judge and feel judged by others. So I think what I'd love to do just as we start this conversation is honor this sort of universal experience of feeling a little prickly when we see other people parenting their kids in ways that we wouldn't, or when we feel like other people are criticizing or judging us. That experience in and of itself, I think, is quite universal for others.
Absolutely. It's such an uncomfortable feeling when you feel like you have those eyes on you.
And we all know it. We've all been there. I often say motherhood is the all-time equalizer. We are all in this together. We all know those horrible, awful, uncomfortable feelings, and we've all been there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, Kate, I thought it would be helpful to go through the basic parenting styles. You know, if someone were to Google parenting styles, traditionally they would come across the four basic: authoritarian, permissive, neglectful, and authoritative, which unfortunately sounds so much like authoritarian, it can be really confusing. I would love your take on describing those four styles, maybe starting with authoritarian. How would you describe that one?
Yeah, for sure. And for a lot of us, these are unconscious. So I think for your listeners, it's important to remember that there's probably a lot of overlap between these things, and that most of us don't just fit into these little boxes. But
Absolutely.
Yes. And I would say that all of them have pros and cons, right? I think one of the things that comes up for many, many mothers, because mothering can feel so scary because it's this huge burden of responsibility. When we're in a place of real or perceived threat, our brains go to all or nothing thinking.
Mm.
And that reactive way of thinking that becomes rigid is usually where the problems show up. So I'm sure we'll talk about this later, the importance of context, but
Mm-hmm.
I just do want your listeners to realize that the more rigid you're being, that is the evidence we have that you're probably feeling pretty fearful in the moment, because that rigid thinking comes from fear.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
So authoritarian parenting is sort of what it sounds like, right? It's taking the authority. It's rigid. There's often very high expectations, a lot of rules, that it can be strict, it can be rule following, it can be my way or the highway mentality.
Yeah.
There's very little explanation. This is sort of the like, but why? But why? Because I said so.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of disregard for emotion. This might be the, I'll give you something to cry about, or, go upstairs to your room. It's a little bit of that, or a lot of that sort of very strict, rigid, rule following type of parenting. This can lead to first of all, what's the benefit of this? Children can be scared into following rules. So you may find children in families where there's authoritarian parenting styles that children are well behaved, right? But almost always that's going to be a fear-based, if I don't follow the rules, something bad is going to happen. But some of those parents may find that kids are really well behaved. There can be a lot of aggression in those kids because there's stored up emotion that hasn't been tended to and cared for. There can be difficulty making decisions, right? If there's no clear rule, then a kid can be like, I don't know what to do. I need a rule to know what to do. And there can be a lot of, self-esteem challenges for those kids. And sometimes a lot of rebellion in adolescence because there's a pushing back by all those rigid rules. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Permissive parenting is like the opposite, right? Permissive parenting, there are a lot of different words that we can use for this, but that's sort of the very nurturing, highly responsive, very almost like I need to make sure that my kids are okay all the time, so I'm never going to say no. That tends to be what permissive parenting is. There are very little boundaries. There's limited discipline. Sometimes, there is a form of a parenting style out there that people may follow, your listeners may follow, called attachment parenting, not to be confused with secure attachment, two different fields of study, but attachment parenting is often baby-led or child-led parenting. I'm going to just let my baby or my child call the shots. And this can be quite loving and tender. However, it can lead to impulsivity for kids. There can be a lot of challenges with self-regulation. We know that kids actually need boundaries. They need to know what the limits are. There can be challenges later in life, like unhealthy eating habits, because, what I see a lot in a lot of my clients, the more permissive sort of child-led parenting can be those moms who are kind of making 5 things at one time at dinner because their kid doesn't want anything, so they keep giving them the thing that they want, right? And so that can lead to sort of a tendency to not try new things. I think one of the biggest challenges for kids is that as they grow older, is that there can be a expectation of comfort. These kids may not necessarily know what it's like to feel uncomfortable and still be okay, because the parenting has been around to make sure that they're sort of never uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And again, kids need boundaries. So if there aren't boundaries and then they go to school and there are boundaries, or they go out into society and there's boundaries, there can be a lot of behavioral challenges because kids don't know how to exist within a structure like that. A lot of kids who, by the way, also, this is a little more of a psychological piece, but oftentimes moms who are a little more permissive don't know how to sit with and feel discomfort. And so a lot of their parenting is around, I don't want my child to feel uncomfortable, because if my child feels uncomfortable, I will feel uncomfortable emotionally. And I can't tolerate my own emotional discomfort. And so I need my child to be a certain way so that I can feel okay.
Huh.
And that can unintentionally create this sort of parentified child situation where that child's job, unconsciously or unintendedly, becomes to make sure that their parent is okay all the time.
Oh dear. Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes.
The
Neglectful?
neglectful is a little bit, it's sort of permissive, but without the connection, right? So neglectful parent is really the parent that is uninvolved entirely, right? That's the parent that sort of, we often see this for parents who are working a lot,
Sure.
right? Or for parents who are going through their own traumatic experience. I know that sometimes when parents get divorced early on, or if there's some sort of trauma in the relationship or in the mother's life, unintentionally can create this neglectful parenting situation because it's sort of easier to believe that the kid is okay on their own, because if they're not, then I have to actually show up and parent, and I have no bandwidth. I have nothing to give. These kids who are raised in that parenting situation tend to be pretty self-resourceful. They tend to be children who are very independent. However, they also are those kids that tend to grow into adults who believe that their needs don't matter or that they shouldn't have any. These are the kids that are making their own snacks and they're making their own dinner and they're putting themselves to bed. They're, again, that parentified version of a child. And then they can become sort of uber caretakers of other people in life. They can have a hard time receiving help and support as they grow older. And they kind of learn that if I don't do it, no one else will mentality. And that's really tricky because we're also so social and emotional beings. And so that can get in the way of really healthy relationships in childhood or beyond, because there isn't that sort of interconnectedness that ideally a child and a parent are experiencing together early in life.
And now we are going to pause for a message from our sponsor. Today's episode of Little Feet Community is brought to you in part by the letter M for Misto. Located in Red Hook, New York, Misto means mixed in Portuguese. Misto's menu is filled with a fusion of flavors from various cuisines held dear by chefs Wilson and Nadia Costa, and inspired by the classic kitchens of France, Brazil, Indonesia, and many others. Chefs Wilson and Nadia are passionate about using locally sourced vegetables and even edible flowers, many of which are grown by Nadia. Misto is a go-to destination for those who wish to avoid gluten, offering many excellent gluten-free options alongside their regular offerings. To learn more about Misto, including their open-air catering options, visit them at misto-eats.com. That's misto-eats.com. And we are back to Little Feet Community with our guest, Kate Kripke. And now, authoritative.
Well, authoritative, believe it or not, is sort of in today's day and age known to be the most healthy way to raise a child. The word is weird because it does sound like authoritarian, right? But I think of authoritative as sort of the both and, right? Yeah. This is the parent who is both creating structure and boundary. And I don't know if we'll get into what boundaries are today, but just to make sure everyone knows, boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are decisions we're making that are in service of the health of everybody involved, right? So in an authoritative parenting style, there's both boundary and warmth. There's very clear expectations, but they're communicated clearly. And there's a lot of explanations, right? And by the way, side note, there's some really interesting data out there that has studied, the kind of progression of kids over time and how successful they are with all kinds of markers, behavioral, social, emotional. And the kids that do the best in life are children who are raised by parents and families where there's a focus on values rather than rules. So rules is pretty authoritarian. Values are pretty authoritative. You know what? Our family really values kindness. So when we're talking to people, we say please and thank you, and we look them in the eye. Or, we really value family time. So we sit down when we're eating. And so we can all be together. So it's a very different type of explanation with these kids. Does that make sense? It encourages independence while also providing support.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the big things here, and I teach this in my coaching all the time, is that emotions are never the problem. And we don't want to put so much emphasis on emotions that we're teaching that because you're feeling a certain way, you don't have to do that thing you don't want to do, right?
Right.
But we also don't want to say you have to do that thing that you don't want to do and your emotions don't matter. Right. So an authoritative parent is really being able to say with compassion, of course you're angry.
Right.
You wanted to play with that toy and it's not yours.
Right.
Of course you're disappointed. You wanted to go to that friend's house and I said no, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can be really angry, but you can't kick and hit your sister, or you can't scream that loud down in the living room, right? So there's boundaries with that deep validation. You're seeing, hearing, and understanding your child while also holding those boundaries that help that child trust that they're being contained within a system where a responsible parent is holding them in place. That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, but I love how you, Kate, how you touched upon the fact that there are overlaps and gray areas, and because there are so many different ways to parent and there's no one right way. And this idea of, standing in judgment or being judged, it's really only in service when maybe there's really health and safety at risk for a child.
No, I actually think you're asking a great question. Can I respond to what I?
Yeah, please.
You're saying? So I agree. There is no one right way to raise a child. I have a bias here, which I'm just going to name, and my bias comes from 20 years in the field of maternal and child mental health, and I also have 2 teenage daughters, so I have figured this out the hard way because Lord knows none of us are perfect.
Right.
I believe very strongly that if we are not taking care of ourselves first as mothers, we will be easily triggered in hard mothering moments. Without a doubt, mothering is infiltrated with uncertainty and unpredictability and chaos. And the process of mothering is filled with those things, and our small children are inherently those things.
Yeah.
If I am not really prioritizing what I need to be healthy and well, getting enough sleep, being in a relationship with other adults that I feel safe and enjoy with, playing, eating healthy food, drinking enough water, moving my body, all these things we actually need to do to keep our mind, body, and spirit healthy. Mm-hmm. If I'm not doing that, I will be triggered in those hard parenting moments.
Absolutely.
Most of those authoritative, permissive, and neglectful occur when we're in reaction to some kind of uncomfortable experience and emotion. That's my experience in watching parents over all this time. Those types of parenting styles are usually not intentional.
Yeah.
My bias is that there's no one right way to raise a child and parent a child as long as you're taking care of yourself first. And it's not taking care of myself instead of taking care of my child. It's taking care of myself in service of my child.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's kind of like put on the oxygen mask.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Now, Kate, what should a parent do if the parenting styles or family guidelines of another family don't really match well with their own? How do you recommend they navigate it? Like in the scenario at the pizza place, this is a relationship that is very important to them. How do you maintain that in the face of very different styles?
Yeah. So I often like to say everything you want is on the other side of a hard conversation. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's sort of 2 different scenarios here. I'm going to go with the one that you've described first. This relationship with this other family is very important to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? You want to stay in relationship with them. So let's say you're at the pizza place and another parent yells at the child, is very authoritarian, right? Or let's say that here's another one that, I've got 2 teenagers, so certainly have been there, where the other child is on their phone during a meal and the parent is letting them, right? This is when it's really great later, not at the moment, but later to come back and say, hey, I noticed this thing that happened between the parent and child. What was that like for you?
Mm.
How did that feel? And just to have an open conversation, because our children are going to be around all kinds of different people in their life. And we want to help them understand that they can have their normal feelings about that. And we want to be having those open, clear communications with our kids. That's the first part.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you're bringing the conversation back to the wellness of your family and your relationship with your kids. Get through the moment. With the friend, with the relative, but then have that validating conversation, that open conversation with your children.
And if it's, you can even, let's say the parent and there's an arguing moment or a yelling moment, connection with our children is so important. It happens in so many different ways. Put your hand on their head or their arm or squeeze their hand for a moment. It's just that, like, I know this is different than we're used to, and I'm right here with you, right? There's a nonverbal way of connecting.
Yeah.
If the family is a family that you're going to see again, I'm going to encourage a conversation about different parenting styles. We name it to tame it, right? And we say, hey, I just have noticed that we parent our kids differently. And I want to make sure you know that these are the choices I'm going to be making with my kiddo. And it may be different than yours. And do you have any questions? And, just that hard conversation with the other adult so that you don't get in this situation where because that other person is letting their kid be on their phone, you feel like you have to let your kid be on the phone.
Right. Exactly. You shouldn't feel pressure to change your own parenting
That's
style.
Right. That's right.
Absolutely.
And I also think it's okay to decide not to spend time with families if the parenting style is different, right? If it just doesn't feel good and they're not someone that you have to have in your life, it is okay to choose to spend time with people that share values, that are like-minded. And I think there's nothing better than village parenting. And I will always encourage parents to find other parents who have similar parenting styles where you can co-parent together. I mean, there's nothing better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now, Kate, we did get a few questions, when I shared that you were going to be joining us, we got some questions,
Great.
very specific scenarios. So I'd love for your take on this. Now, so the first question was about eating habits. So what if your friend has very different ideas about what food is offered? And, when your child goes to their house, maybe there are a lot of sweets offered. Would that be a conversation with your child? Or what if your child is quite young and you don't feel comfortable doing that?
Yeah. So we want to make sure, again, that our need for control is based on a real threat, not a perceived threat. Right? So sometimes we can get confused about what is really dangerous and what am I telling myself is really dangerous. And again, I want to go back to the moving out of rigid thinking, right? If I were like, my child can never have sugar. Now, unless there's a real medical diagnosis, which there might be, I don't never want to step on toes of real medical issues, but that rigid thinking is going to come from some fear that the parent has and is usually the parent's job to manage and take care of, because what can be problematic is trying to control the environment all the time so that my child never has sugar because I get anxious when my child has sugar, when really most things in moderation are just fine.
Yeah.
I also think it's a really big expectation to ask a child to say, I'm not allowed to have sugar when 3 other friends at the play date are eating cupcakes.
Right.
That's too much pressure.
Agreed.
For a child.
Absolutely.
So I would encourage that parent to see what happens if she were to challenge this belief she has. about sugar being horrible and bad and something bad happening with my kid.
Mm.
If we just know, like, I am not okay with my kid having junk food or sugar or whatever it is, then it's a conversation with the other parent. I think that hard conversation to say, hey, this is a non-negotiable for me, and to trust that that's okay. Okay, so it's a non-negotiable. So we want to communicate that. But again, if the baseline at home is healthy eating, probably nothing bad's going to happen if that kiddo has some junk food at a friend's house.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So now the next question that came in, it was about health issues. And I've known parents who feel that it's okay to bring their child to a play date while the child is running a fever, as long as they've given them Tylenol. I suspect you're going to say that it's have a conversation with the other family. But what if this happens, kind of it's a continual that, after you have a play date, you find out the child was running a fever?
Yeah. My bias is that unless we run it by a parent first and the parent says, no problem, I'm happy to have your child, we should not be bringing sick kids to school or to other people's homes, because we wouldn't want that ourselves. Right? I know I just used the word should. I try really hard not to use that, but I do have a pretty strong bias around the importance of holding ourselves 100% accountable. And if I want to be treated a certain way, I need to be willing to treat other people the same way. So
absolutely, yeah.
It's one of the reasons why parenting is so hard, because it can be really inconvenient to have kids. I believe that it is totally appropriate in a situation like that to communicate with that parent after and say, hey, I just want you to know that I'm really bummed about the way this went down.
Yeah.
I really wish you had told me. And I need to know that next time you're going to let me know if your kid is sick.
So, Kate, I was actually at a Pick Your Own farm last fall, and a little boy was relieving himself in the woods. I was actually shocked at the emotional and judgmental reaction from the other parents. An actual verbal altercation ended up taking place. So I'd love it if you could speak to that. Maybe advice for the parents of the nature boy, but then also advice for the parents who just felt clearly so overwhelmed by the situation.
I giggled when I saw this one because this same thing happened to me. And I was the judgmental parent when my kids were little. So this is a beautiful question because I can very much see both sides. So let me back up first and say, what judgments are, when we are judging someone, what we're actually doing is judging the part of ourselves that we're the least comfortable with, that person is reflecting back to us. That's what a judgment is, right?
Right.
It actually, judgments have very little to do with the other person. It's that the other person is showing us a part of ourselves that we are totally resistant to, really uncomfortable with, okay?
Yeah.
And this is part of why there's so much judgment in early motherhood, because so much of our most vulnerable, scared parts come to the surface when we become parents of our own kids. We're reminded of what it feels like to be a young child when we are mothering young children. So to me, the more comfortable we are and accepting we are of the decisions that we're making for our children and our families, the less likely we are to care about what anyone else is doing.
Yeah.
That makes sense? I see this with breastfeeding and bottle feeding a lot with new parents, right? If I am totally comfortable with breastfeeding my child and it is the right thing to me and I'm not resistant to it, like if someone's bottle feeding next to me, I'm whatever, you do you, and vice versa. If I'm really comfortable with bottle feeding my child and someone else is breastfeeding, you do you.
Right.
That's what I think of when I think of this example, right? So I think of the rule follower, don't get in anyone's space, rule follow, do the right thing. And then I think of the whatever else you want to call the other person. It might be the rebel. It might be the person who's just like, whatever's easiest is as long as no one's getting hurt, right? I mean, I'm going to make an assumption that child isn't, peeing on someone's lunch, right? There's actually no harm being caused, right?
Right.
And this is why that situation happened, right? So this to me this is why I think I just really wish more parents would get support from a coach or a mentor or a friend who's been there before them or a therapist, because we want to do whatever we can to really learn to trust our own decisions. That is a situation where I would want to encourage both parents to take 100% for their 100%, to really own their feelings, to own their fears and judgments, all with compassion, no shame, no blame, but to just be able to say, oh my gosh, I'm such a rule follower and it's so uncomfortable. Anytime I don't follow a rule, I feel so uncomfortable. And so when you let your kid pee there, like it just brought up all that discomfort. And I judged you because I judge myself when I break rules. I mean, that's really what's happening, right?
Yeah, right.
And then another person might say, oh my gosh, I was so frustrated when you told me that I couldn't let my kid pee there, because anytime anyone tells me something that I'm supposed to do something, I'm reminded of when I'm a child. And the reality is that like, I just didn't want to have to care. I just wanted, once we own it, we can all be like, okay, right? We take it all a little less personally. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but that's certainly what I think is happening there. And then we're going back, Patty, to that, like, yeah, let's all just have the hard conversations and be able to say, wow, that was so uncomfortable. That's what happened for me. I like made some judgmental comment. My friend was like, I can't believe you're judging me. And then I got mad at her for thinking I would judge her. And then I stopped and I was like, I was totally judging you. I was totally judging you. I'm such a rule follower, and that was not following the rules, and it made me uncomfortable, and I'm sorry. And then she was able to say, well, I just got lazy, and then the bathroom was right there, and I could have taken them to the bathroom, but I didn't feel like following the rules, and I'm sorry, right? And then we were both like, okay, moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that you had that thought so early into the experience. But yeah, thank you, Kate. That's wonderful. Thank you for offering us guidance today, Kate. We truly appreciate your advice and expertise. Listeners, to hear more of Kate's expertise, check out her podcast, Motherhood Uncut, and order her book, Reinventing Supermom: Support and Strategies for New Mothers Who Feel Lost. Today's episode of Little Feet Community is brought to you in part by the letter M for Mega Brain Comics. Located in the Hudson Valley's Red Hook, New York, Mega Brain Comics is the only Black-owned comic book store in New York State. They cater to local and online customers with a deep focus on historically underrepresented folks in the LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC communities, as well as girls and women, people with disabilities, and the uniquely neurodivergent. To learn more, please visit them at megabraincomics.com, on Instagram at megabraincomics, and on Blue Sky at megabrain.bsky.social. This has been the Little Feet Community Podcast. I'm Patty O'Connor, a retired preschool teacher and your host. A special thanks to our producer, Miranda Schaefer, and associate producer, Tara Schaefer. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and rate us on your podcast platform of choice. And please check out our Instagram account for news of future episode topics at Little Feet Community. You can also learn more about Little Feet Community on our website, www.littlefeetcommunity.com, and at our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/@Little Feet Community. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to play.